They called her the Widowmaker, a black mare with eyes like smoke and a reputation that sent grown men looking for exits. At the Carson Valley Livestock Exchange, under a blistering August sun that turned the metal bleachers into griddles, a young woman stood up with nothing but two $50 bills folded in her palm, and the auctioneer nearly dropped his gavel. The crowd didn't just laugh. They howled. But what unfolded in the months that followed would rewrite everything this high desert town thought they knew about wildness, about healing, and about the thin line between the two. This isn't a story about dominance. It's about the courage to stand still. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The August heat pressed down on Carson Valley like a hand holding something underwater. The livestock exchange sprawled across 10 acres of packed dirt and weathered fencing, the kind of place that smelled like generations of sweat and hay dust and decisions made fast under pressure. Trucks lined the gravel lots, their beds loaded with empty trailers waiting to be filled. Vendors had set up along the midway, selling belt buckles and boot polish and paper plates loaded with funnel cake that wilted in the heat before you could finish eating. The loudspeaker crackled with static between announcements, and somewhere in the maze of holding pens, cattle lowed with the resigned exhaustion of creatures who understood their purpose here. Emma Torres sat in the back row of the bleachers with her camera bag between her feet and her brother's old baseball cap pulled low over her eyes. She had driven 3 hours from Reno that morning, winding through mountain passes where the pines gave way to sagebrush and the air turned dry enough to crack lips. She told herself she was here for photographs, for a freelance piece about rural Nevada that an outdoor magazine had commissioned months ago and that she kept putting off. She told herself she wasn't looking for anything in particular. But her hands hadn't stopped shaking since she pulled into the parking lot, and the cap she wore still smelled faintly of her brother's aftershave even though he had been gone 3 years. The auctioneer was a man named Dale Pritchard, fourth-generation livestock handler with a voice like gravel sliding down a metal chute. He worked the crowd with the easy rhythm of someone who had done this 1,000 times, his cadence rising and falling, numbers flying faster than thought. Lot 14 went for $3,500, a paint gelding with good bone structure and a calm eye. Lot 15 brought competing bids from 2 ranch families who knew each other well enough to make it personal, the price climbing until one of them shook his head and sat down hard. Lot 16, a matched pair of sorrels, sold to a woman in a purple shirt who wrote the check before the gavel even fell. Then Dale cleared his throat in a way that made the whole crowd lean forward. Lot 17, he announced, and the energy in the bleachers shifted like a sudden wind change. Black mare, approximately 6 years old, unbroken, unsuitable for novice handlers. The pause that followed was deliberate. No guarantees on this one, folks. She comes as is. The holding pen gate swung open and 2 handlers let her out, or tried to. The mare fought every step, her hooves striking sparks against the metal rails. Her neck arched so tight the muscles stood out like cables under her coat. She was pure black except for a white star between her eyes, shaped like a lightning bolt or a crack in stone. Her mane whipped as she tossed her head, and when she exhaled through her nostrils it sounded like distant thunder. The handlers held lead ropes on either side, their knuckles white, their boots sliding in the dirt as they tried to keep her centered in the ring. Widowmaker, someone muttered from the row in front of Emma. That's the one that belonged to Katie Vance. The name hit the crowd like a stone thrown into still water. Katie Vance had been a legend in the barrel racing circuit, a rider so precise and fearless that she made the impossible look choreographed. 2 years ago at the national finals in Las Vegas, her horse had stumbled coming out of the 3rd barrel. Katie went down headfirst. The mare, this mare, had stood over her body until the paramedics arrived, screaming a sound that people said didn't belong to any animal they had ever heard. Katie died before she reached the hospital. The mare was sold to a trainer in Idaho who sent her back after 3 weeks with a warning note and a vet bill for stitches. Another trainer in Oregon lasted 2 days. The mare had been passed through 4 owners in 2 years, and each one added to the mythology. Dangerous, unpredictable, cursed. Dale started the bidding at $5,000, his voice carrying less confidence than usual. The silence stretched. He dropped to $4,000, then $3,000. A man in a black Stetson raised 2 fingers, more out of curiosity than commitment. Someone else countered with 2,500. The bidding crept forward in reluctant increments, the numbers falling instead of rising. The mare fought the ropes, her eyes rolling white, and one of the handlers stumbled backward when she reared, hooves flashing in the hard sunlight. 2,000, Dale called. Do I hear 2,000? Emma's pulse hammered in her ears. She thought about her brother Daniel, about the trail ride in the mountains above Lake Tahoe where his horse had spooked at a snake hidden in the rocks. She had been leading the group that day, confident and relaxed, talking over her shoulder about the wildflowers blooming late that year. She heard the scream of the horse, the crack of branches, and when she turned around Daniel was already gone, sliding down the ravine, and the only thing she could do was watch. She hadn't ridden since, hadn't touched a horse, hadn't even been near a stable without her chest constricting so tight she thought her ribs might snap. But looking at this mare, at the terror and rage pouring off her in waves, Emma saw something else. She saw herself 3 years ago, standing in a hospital waiting room, everyone talking around her, voices offering comfort and questions and none of it reaching her because the noise inside her own head was louder. She saw the way people had looked at her afterward, the same way they were looking at this mare now. Broken, dangerous, better off gone. 1,000, Dale said, and the disappointment in his voice was thick. Anyone willing to go 1,000? The man in the Stetson shook his head and sat down. The woman in the purple shirt studied her fingernails. The mare screamed, a sound so raw it silenced the vendor calling out corn dog prices. One of the handlers shouted something Emma couldn't make out, and the rope burned through his gloves as the mare surged sideways. She was going to hurt someone, or they were going to hurt her. And after that, she would disappear into a trailer headed for a slaughter yard outside Reno, and no one here would lose sleep over it. Emma stood up. The bleacher groaned under the shift of weight, and a few heads turned. She pulled the 2 $50 bills from her pocket, holding them up so Dale could see. 100, she said. Her voice came out steady even though her hands weren't. The crowd noise died like someone had thrown a breaker switch. Dale blinked, his gavel frozen halfway to the block. One of the handlers laughed, a sharp bark of disbelief. A woman 3 rows down turned completely around in her seat, mouth open. Miss, Dale said slowly, I don't think you understand what you're bidding on. I understand, Emma said. $100. The laughter started then, rolling through the bleachers in waves. Someone whistled low and long. A man in a denim jacket leaned over to his buddy and said something that made them both double over. A teenage boy cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, You got a death wish or just stupid? His father didn't tell him to stop. Dale looked at the handlers, at the mare throwing her weight against the ropes, at Emma standing in the back row with her camera bag and her dead brother's hat and an expression that didn't match the chaos around her. He sighed, a sound that carried its own story about long days and hard choices. Rules are rules, he said finally. Sold, lot 17, to the young lady for $100. He brought the gavel down and the sound cracked across the exchange like a bone breaking. The laughter surged again, louder now, mixed with applause that wasn't celebration but mockery, the kind of clapping that said we'll be talking about this for years. Emma made her way down the bleacher steps, each footfall deliberate, her camera bag bouncing against her hip. People shifted to let her pass, some grinning. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Some shaking their heads, one woman reaching out as if to stop her and then thinking better of it. The handlers met her at the edge of the ring. One of them, a man with sun damage across his nose and skepticism in every line of his face, held out the lead rope like he was handing her a live grenade. You sure about this? He asked. Emma took the rope. The mare's head swung toward her, nostrils flaring, every muscle in her body coiled. For a moment they stood there, girl and horse, separated by 6 feet of rope and an ocean of fear. Emma didn't pull, didn't jerk the line or make demands. She just held it, letting the weight settle in her palm, and waited. The mare's ears flicked forward. Just once. Just enough. Emma turned and started walking toward the exit gate, the rope trailing loose behind her. The crowd held its breath. The mare hesitated, head high, eyes wild, and then she took one step, then another. She didn't follow because she was broken. She followed because something in the way Emma moved, shoulders down and pace unhurried, didn't feel like the beginning of a fight. They walked out of the ring together into the white glare of the parking lot, the noise of the auction fading behind them. Emma's truck sat at the far end, a dusty Ford Ranger with a camper shell and enough dents to tell its own story. She had cleaned out the bed that morning, laying down fresh straw she had bought from a feed store on the highway, though she couldn't have explained why she did it. The mare balked at the ramp, nostrils flaring at the enclosed darkness. Emma didn't force it. She tied the rope loosely to the side rail, climbed into the truck bed herself, and sat down in the straw. "Take your time," she said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere." The sun beat down. Sweat traced lines through the dust on Emma's face. The mare paced, the rope pulling taut and then slack, her breath coming hard. Minutes passed. Maybe 10. Maybe 20. Emma pulled a granola bar from her pocket and ate it slowly, the oats sticking to her teeth. She didn't look at the mare directly, just sat there, existing in the same space, proving that proximity didn't have to mean pain. Finally, the mare's head lowered. She sniffed the ramp, testing it with one hoof. Then she walked up, slow and deliberate, and stood in the truck bed with her head almost touching the camper shell roof. Emma reached out, not to grab, just to let her hand rest in the air between them. The mare's nostrils flared again, reading the scent, and then she turned her head just slightly, acknowledging the gesture without accepting it. "Okay," Emma whispered. "Okay." She climbed out carefully, secured the tailgate, and got behind the wheel. Her hands were shaking so hard it took 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. In the rearview mirror, she could see the mare's silhouette, dark against the bright rectangle of the camper shell opening. As Emma pulled out of the parking lot, kicking up dust that hung in the air like a question, she saw people still gathered near the auction ring, watching her leave. Some were shaking their heads. Some were already placing bets on how long before the mare sent her to the emergency room. But Emma didn't look back. She turned the truck north toward the mountains, toward the old Bennett ranch where she had been crashing for the past 2 weeks while photographing the valley. She had no plan, no training, no idea what she was doing. All she had was $100 less than she started with, a truck full of fear and fury, and the gut certainty that walking away would have been the same as walking away from herself. The road stretched ahead, heat shimmering off the asphalt in waves. The radio played low, some old country song about second chances and roads less traveled. In the back, the mare shifted her weight, the truck rocking slightly. Emma gripped the wheel and drove into the mountains, into the late afternoon sun that turned the sagebrush gold and lit the Sierra peaks on fire. Behind her, Carson Valley shimmered in the heat like a mirage. Ahead, the future waited, uncertain and terrifying and somehow impossibly alive with something that felt dangerously close to hope. The Bennett Ranch sat 15 miles outside town where the valley floor started its climb toward the Sierra foothills. The main house was a single-story structure with blue paint peeling like sunburned skin, its porch sagging under the weight of decades. Jack Bennett had lived there alone since his wife passed 8 years ago, and the property showed the signs of a man who had stopped fighting entropy and started negotiating with it instead. Fence posts leaned at conversational angles. The barn roof wore patches of mismatched tin that caught the light like scattered coins. Tumbleweeds gathered in the corners of empty corrals where cattle hadn't stood in 5 years. Emma had met Jack 3 weeks earlier at the Silver Spoon Cafe, the diner on Main Street where the coffee was strong enough to strip paint, and the waitresses knew everyone's order before they sat down. She had been photographing the early morning light through the cafe windows when Jack shuffled in wearing boots held together with duct tape, and a flannel shirt that had seen better decades. He sat at the counter and ordered eggs scrambled dry, toast burnt, coffee black. When he noticed Emma's camera, he asked what she was shooting. She told him about the magazine assignment, how she was documenting disappearing ranch culture in the American West. He grunted, sipped his coffee, and said if she wanted to photograph disappearing, she should come see his place before the bank took it. She had driven out that afternoon. The ranch sprawled across 80 acres of scrubland and dried creek beds, with views that stretched all the way to the snow-capped peaks when the air was clear. Jack showed her the barn, the empty bunkhouse, the chicken coop where no chickens had lived in 3 years. He told her about running 200 head of cattle back when beef prices made sense, about his son who moved to Sacramento and called twice a year, about property taxes that kept climbing while everything else kept falling. When Emma asked if she could stay in the bunkhouse while she worked on her assignment, Jack studied her for a long moment with eyes the color of faded denim, then handed her a key that looked older than both of them combined. Now, as Emma's truck rattled up the dirt drive with the mare in the back, Jack was sitting on the porch in a chair made from an old tractor seat, a bottle of beer sweating in his hand despite the heat. He watched the truck approach with the patient curiosity of someone who had seen enough strange things that one more wouldn't register as remarkable. Emma parked near the barn and killed the engine. The silence that followed felt thick, broken only by the mare shifting in the truck bed and the distant cry of a hawk circling thermals overhead. Jack didn't get up. He took a sip of beer and called across the yard. "That a horse in your truck?" "Yes, sir," Emma called back. "Is supposed to be in there?" "Not really. Is staying? If that's okay." Jack considered this, his face showing nothing. The beer bottle made a small circle in the air, something between a shrug and a benediction. "Your funeral," he said, and went back to studying the mountains. Emma opened the tailgate slowly, every movement measured. The mare stood with her head high, eyes fixed on the barn, on the open corrals, on the vast emptiness of the landscape. She was still wired tight, still ready to explode, but something about the space seemed to calm her slightly. There were no bleachers here, no crowd noise, just wind and distance and the smell of sage carried up from the valley floor. Emma untied the rope and stepped back, giving the mare room to make her own choice. For a long moment nothing happened. Then the mare backed down the ramp, hooves careful on the wood, and stood in the dirt drive with her head swinging side to side, taking inventory. Emma walked toward the barn and the mare followed, not close, but following, maintaining a distance that felt deliberate. They crossed the yard like that, girl and horse separated by 20 feet of hot air, until Emma pulled open the barn door and stepped inside. The barn smelled like old hay and motor oil and time itself. Light filtered through gaps in the siding, throwing stripes across the dirt floor. 3 stalls lined one wall, their doors hanging crooked on rusted hinges. The other wall held a workbench buried under coffee cans full of nails and bolts and mysterious parts to machines that probably didn't exist anymore. A ladder led up to a loft where pigeons cooed in the rafters. Emma had been sleeping in the bunkhouse, but she had spent hours in this barn, photographing the way light moved through the space, the geometry of shadows, the beautiful decay of things slowly returning to the earth. She opened the largest stall, the one at the far end with a window that looked out toward the mountains. The floor was dirt packed hard as concrete. A metal water trough sat in one corner, bone dry and decorated with rust. Emma turned on the spigot outside and waited while brown water coughed through pipes that hadn't been used in years. Eventually it ran clear and she filled the trough, the sound of water echoing through the empty barn like applause. She forked fresh straw from a bale Jack had left near the door, spreading it thick across the stall floor. The physical work felt good, her muscles remembering old rhythms from childhood summers spent at her grandmother's farm in Central California. When she finished, the mare was standing in the barn doorway, backlit by the late afternoon sun, so she looked less like an animal and more like a hole cut in the world. Emma tied the lead rope to a post near the stall entrance, leaving enough slack that the mare could move, could enter the stall if she chose, but couldn't bolt into the open countryside. Then Emma sat down on an overturned bucket about 15 feet away and waited. The waiting was the hardest part. Emma's mind wanted to fill the silence with plans, with steps, with the illusion of control. She thought about all the horse training videos she had watched in the 3-hour drive back from Reno, her phone propped on the dashboard, absorbing information about natural horsemanship and trust-building exercises. But none of those videos had prepared her for the reality of sitting in a barn with an animal radiating pure survival instinct, an animal who had learned that humans meant pain or death or both. So Emma did the only thing that made sense. She pulled out her guitar. She had bought it at a pawn shop in Reno 2 years ago, during the worst of her grief, when she couldn't sleep and couldn't cry and couldn't do anything except drive around at 3 in the morning, looking for some way to feel human. The guitar was a cheap acoustic with a crack along the body that someone had repaired with wood glue and hope. Emma didn't know how to play, not really. She knew a handful of chords her brother had taught her when they were kids, before he got serious about baseball and she got serious about photography, and they both got too busy for the things that didn't lead anywhere practical. After he died, she had started playing again, teaching herself slowly through YouTube tutorials and sheer persistence, because the act of making sound, even bad sound, felt like proof she still existed. Now she positioned the guitar across her lap and started playing, her fingers finding the shapes of G and C and D, the transition still clumsy but improving. She didn't sing, just played, letting the notes fill the barn the way water had filled the trough, giving the space something besides fear to hold. The mare's ears swiveled toward the sound. Her head lowered slightly, not in submission but in attention, listening to this strange human doing the strange thing that didn't involve ropes or pressure or demands. Emma played until her fingertips ached, until the light coming through the barn walls turned from gold to orange to deep purple. She played the same progression over and over, not trying to perform or impress, just creating a pattern the mare could depend on, a rhythm that said I'm here and I'm staying and nothing bad is happening. When her fingers finally cramped too much to continue, she set the guitar aside and noticed that the mare had moved. Not much, maybe 5 feet closer. But closer. You can have the stall, Emma said quietly, or you can stand there all night. Your choice. She stood slowly, joints stiff from sitting, and walked to the barn door. The mare tensed but didn't bolt. Emma stepped outside into the cooling evening, leaving the barn door open, and crossed the yard to the bunkhouse. Through the window she could see Jack on the porch, the beer bottle empty now, his silhouette dark against the dying light. He raised one hand in a small wave. Emma waved back and went inside. The bunkhouse was a single room with a narrow bed, a wood stove, a sink with a pump handle, and a shelf holding 3 books that looked like they had been there since the 70s. Emma had brought a camping lantern and a sleeping bag, along with her camera equipment and a duffel bag of clothes that smelled like the various motel rooms she had been rotating through for the past 6 months. She lit the lantern, pumped water into a dented pot, and heated it on the wood stove for instant coffee. While she waited for the water to boil, she downloaded the day's photos onto her laptop, scrolling through images of the auction, the crowd, the mare fighting the ropes. In one shot, taken just after Emma made her bid, you could see the mare's eye in sharp focus, everything else blurred. The eye was huge and dark and full of something that looked less like rage and more like drowning. Emma closed the laptop and drank her coffee standing at the window, watching the barn. She couldn't see inside from this angle, couldn't tell if the mare had entered the stall or was still standing guard in the doorway. She thought about her brother, about the morning of his funeral when she had stood in the bathroom of her parents' house, staring at her own reflection, and realized she didn't recognize the person looking back. That woman had empty eyes. That woman was barely breathing. That woman had already decided that living hurt too much to keep doing it with any real commitment. Emma had been that woman for 3 years, moving through the world like a ghost passing through walls, and she had almost gotten comfortable with the numbness, almost accepted it as permanent. But standing in this bunkhouse on this ranch that was barely holding together, knowing that in the barn 30 yards away there was a horse everyone had written off the same way Emma had written herself off, something shifted. Not fixed, not healed, just shifted like a bone setting itself slightly closer to true. She finished her coffee, washed the cup in the sink, and lay down on the narrow bed still wearing her clothes. Through the window she could see stars emerging, more stars than existed in any city, a reminder of how much light you only notice when you stop filling the darkness with noise. She dreamed of Daniel, but not the nightmare version she usually got. In this dream they were kids again, maybe 10 and 8, playing in the creek behind their grandmother's farm. Daniel was trying to catch minnows with his hands, laughing every time they slipped through his fingers. Emma was taking pictures with a disposable camera, clicking through the roll with the careless abundance of childhood, when film was cheap and time was infinite. In the dream Daniel looked up at her and said something she couldn't quite hear over the sound of water, but his face was happy, really happy, And when she woke up in the dark bunkhouse with moonlight coming through the window, she realized she was crying and it felt good. The next morning came cold and bright, the kind of late summer dawn that promised heat later but started with a chill that made breath visible. Emma woke before sunrise and walked to the barn in her jacket and boots, frost crunching under her steps. She half expected to find the mare gone, broken through the rope, vanished into the hills. But when she pulled open the barn door, the mare was standing in the stall, hay scattered around her feet, water in the trough disturbed enough to show she had been drinking. She looked at Emma with something that wasn't quite trust but might have been curiosity, and Emma felt that shift again, that small movement toward true. She hung a bucket of grain on the stall door hook and retreated to her bucket seat. The mare ignored the grain for 20 minutes, as if eating in front of Emma would be admitting something she wasn't ready to admit. But eventually hunger won. She approached the bucket sideways, head cocked, ready to spook, and took a single bite, then another. By the time the sun cleared the mountains and light poured through the barn windows, the grain was gone and the mare was chewing the last mouthful with her eyes half closed, and Emma was playing her guitar again, filling the morning with sound that meant nothing except presence. Jack appeared in the barn doorway holding 2 tin cups of coffee. He handed one to Emma without comment and leaned against the doorframe, studying the mare with the clinical assessment of someone who had spent a lifetime evaluating livestock. "That's the one from the Vance accident," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. Heard 3 trainers gave up on her." "Heard that too. What makes you think you're different?" Emma wrapped both hands around the warm cup, feeling the heat seep into her palms. "I don't think I'm different," she said. "I think maybe the question is different." Jack sipped his coffee, considering. After a long moment he said, "I got about 70 bags of feed in the old grain shed. Been sitting there since I sold off the last of the cattle. You can use what you need." He pushed off the doorframe, ready to leave, then paused. "My wife used to say the animals that fight the hardest are the ones that got the most to lose. Meant it about the barn cats, but I figure it applies." He walked back toward the house, boots scuffing the dirt, and Emma sat with his words settling in her chest like stones dropped in deep water. She looked at the mare, at the tension still visible in every line of her body, and wondered what it was this animal had to lose. What had already been taken? What she was still holding on to so fiercely that letting it go felt like dying. The days developed a rhythm. Emma woke before light, fed the mare, played guitar while the sun rose. She spent mornings photographing the ranch, the valley, the way shadow moved across sagebrush. She spent afternoons in the barn, sometimes playing music, sometimes just sitting in silence, sometimes talking about nothing in particular. She told the mare about growing up in San Diego, about her brother's obsession with the Padres, about the summer they tried to build a treehouse and it collapsed before they finished the roof. She talked about the accident, about the guilt that had calcified around her lungs until breathing felt like work. She talked about the magazine assignment she was supposed to be finishing and how she kept avoiding it because finishing it meant leaving, and she wasn't sure she was ready to leave yet. The mare listened the way horses listen, with her whole body, ears tracking every word. She didn't approach, didn't invite touch, but she stopped pacing when Emma arrived, started eating the grain without the 20-minute standoff, began drinking from the trough while Emma was still in the barn instead of waiting until she left. These were small victories, barely visible, the kind that wouldn't mean anything to someone watching from outside. But to Emma they felt monumental, each one a sentence in a conversation she was learning to speak. On the 4th day, a boy appeared. Emma was in the barn playing a song she had been working on, something slow with minor chords that felt like the landscape around her, when she looked up and saw a kid standing in the doorway. He was maybe 10 years old, skinny in the way of children who haven't hit their growth spurt, wearing jeans and a Star Wars t-shirt that had been washed so many times Darth Vader's face was barely visible. He stood perfectly still, hands at his sides, watching the mare with an intensity that seemed too large for his small frame. Emma stopped playing. The sudden silence made the mare's ears flick, but she didn't startle. The boy didn't move. Emma set the guitar down carefully and stood up slow, making herself as non-threatening as possible. "Hey there," she said softly. "I'm Emma." The boy didn't respond, didn't even look at her, just kept staring at the mare. Emma tried again. Do you live around here? Nothing. The boy's chest rose and fell with breath, but otherwise, he could have been a photograph of himself, frozen in time. Emma glanced at the mare, who was now watching the boy with the same intensity the boy was watching her, and felt something strange happening in the barn. Some kind of recognition passing between horse and child that didn't include her at all. It's okay if you don't want to talk, Emma said. You can just watch if you want. Her name is Midnight. The boy's lips moved, forming the word midnight without sound. And then he sat down right there in the dirt of the barn entrance, cross-legged, and continued watching. Emma picked up her guitar and started playing again, softer now, giving both the mare and the boy space to exist without expectation. They stayed like that for almost an hour, the three of them held in a triangle of attention, until Emma's fingers cramped and she had to stop. When she looked up, the boy was gone, disappeared as silently as he had arrived. That evening Emma asked Jack if he knew anything about a kid in a Star Wars shirt. Jack nodded slowly. That'd be Tommy Garcia. Lives about a mile up the road with his mama. Good kid, but he don't talk much. Something happened a couple years back, nobody knows exactly what, but he stopped speaking. Goes to school, does his work, but doesn't say a word. Specialists told his mama it's some kind of trauma response. She's hoping he'll come out of it when he's ready. Emma thought about the boy's face, the fierce concentration, the way he watched Midnight like he was memorizing her. The next morning when she walked to the barn, Tommy was already there, sitting in the exact same spot, waiting. This time Emma didn't try to make him talk. She just said good morning and went about her routine, feeding the mare, filling the water, playing her guitar. Tommy watched everything. When Emma pulled out her camera to photograph the morning light hitting the barn walls, Tommy's eyes tracked the lens with interest. On impulse, Emma walked over and held out the camera. You want to try? Tommy looked at her, then at the camera, then back at her. Slowly, very slowly, he reached out and took it. Emma showed him the viewfinder, how to press the shutter button, how to focus. Tommy raised the camera to his face and clicked. The sound of the shutter made Midnight's ears swivel. Tommy clicked again, and again. He photographed the mare from every angle, moving around the barn with surprising grace for a kid, finding perspectives Emma hadn't considered. When the memory card was full, he handed the camera back carefully, and his face held something that looked like gratitude or maybe relief. You can come back tomorrow if you want, Emma said. Tommy nodded once, then left, his footsteps silent on the dirt drive. That night Emma downloaded the photos. Most were out of focus or poorly framed, the work of inexperienced hands. But a few were startling. One shot caught Midnight's eye through the stall bars, the iris reflecting light like a planet. Another showed Emma's guitar leaning against the barn wall, shadow and instrument creating abstract geometry. The best one was simple, Midnight's profile against the barn window, her ears forward, her expression something you might call peaceful if you believed horses could feel peace. Emma set that one as her laptop wallpaper and felt the shift again. That movement toward true, as if all of them, woman and horse and silent boy, were slowly learning the same language. By the end of the first week, Tommy was bringing his own camera, a beat-up digital point and shoot that looked like it had survived several childhood disasters. He and Emma developed an unspoken routine. She would play guitar, he would take pictures, and Midnight would stand in her stall watching them both like they were the most interesting thing she had ever seen. Sometimes Tommy would bring carrots from his mother's kitchen, setting them on the stall door hook with the same careful reverence people brought flowers to graves. Midnight would wait until he stepped back, then take the carrots one at a time, crunching them while Tommy photographed her from 6 different angles. Emma started printing his photos on her portable printer, cheap 8x10 prints that she taped to the barn walls. Tommy arranged them like a gallery, moving them around until the composition satisfied him. He was building a story without words, a visual narrative of the mare's transformation that was also somehow his own transformation, and Emma understood with sudden clarity that healing was never a solo act. It was always communal, always witnessed, always requiring other broken things nearby to remind you that breaking wasn't the end of the story. On the 8th day, a woman appeared at the barn. She was in her early 30s with dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail, and wearing scrubs that said she had come straight from work. Tommy was with her, slightly behind her left shoulder, and when Emma saw them together the resemblance was obvious. "I'm Maria Garcia," the woman said, her accent carrying traces of generations that had lived in this valley longer than most of the white families who claimed it. "I wanted to meet the person who got my son taking pictures again." She smiled, but there was wariness underneath it, a mother's protective assessment. "He hasn't touched that camera in over a year." Emma wiped her dusty hands on her jeans. "I'm Emma Torres. I think your son is teaching me more than I'm teaching him." Maria's expression softened slightly. She walked to the stall and looked at Midnight, at the photos taped around the barn, at the guitar leaning against the wall. She was quiet for a long moment before she spoke again. "They said this horse was dangerous, that she killed someone." "She didn't kill anyone," Emma said carefully. "She was there when someone died. There's a difference." Maria nodded slowly, understanding passing between them like a current. "Tommy's father," she said, and then paused, choosing her words. "He made bad choices. Tommy saw things a child shouldn't see. The police came. His father went to prison. And Tommy just stopped talking. The doctors said he needs time. But time alone doesn't heal anything. It just makes you good at being alone." She turned to Emma, and her eyes were fierce with the kind of love that would burn the world down to protect its object. "My son sees something in that horse, and I think that horse sees something in him. So I'm going to trust this, whatever this is. But if anything happens to him, anything at all, there won't be anywhere far enough for you to run." "Understood?" "Understood," Emma said. Maria called to Tommy in Spanish, something Emma didn't catch but that made Tommy nod. Then she left, and Tommy stayed, and Emma felt the weight of responsibility settle across her shoulders like a saddle. She was responsible now not just for the mare, not just for herself, but for this boy who had trusted her with his silence. The thought was terrifying, but it was also clarifying, cutting through the self-indulgence of her grief to remind her that other people's pain existed too, and sometimes helping them meant accidentally helping yourself. That afternoon Emma sat with Tommy while he photographed Midnight, and she told him about her brother. She told him about the accident, about the guilt, about the 3 years she spent convinced she had killed him through carelessness. Tommy listened without looking at her, his camera clicking periodically, and when she finished talking he did something unexpected. He walked over to where she sat and placed one small hand on her shoulder, just for a moment, before returning to his photography. The gesture was so simple and so complete that Emma had to turn away so he wouldn't see her crying. The sun was setting when they heard the truck. Emma recognized the engine sound before she saw it, that expensive purr of a vehicle that cost more than most people in this valley made in 6 months. A black Chevy Silverado rolled up the drive and parked near the barn, and when the door opened, a man stepped out wearing boots that had never seen actual ranch work and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Victor Hastings," he said, extending a hand that Emma didn't take. "I own the Double H spread on the other side of the valley. Heard you picked up Katie Vance's mare at auction." "Word travels fast," Emma said. Victor smiled wider. "Small town. People talk." He walked to the stall and studied Midnight the way someone might study a car they were considering buying. "Beautiful animal. Shame what happened to Katie. Tragic, really." He turned back to Emma. "I'm in the market for a horse with some star power. My daughter's getting married in December. Big event. Half the county invited. She wants to make an entrance, you know how brides are. I'm thinking this mare, cleaned up and trained proper, would make quite a statement." "She's not for sale," Emma said. Victor's smile didn't waver. "Everything's for sale. It's just a matter of price. I paid $100 for her." Victor laughed, a sound like ice cracking. $100. You practically stole her. Tell you what, I'll give you 5,000. That's a 50 times return on your investment in what? A week. That's better than Wall Street. Emma felt Tommy pressed against her side, watching this man with an expression that looked like fear. She put her hand on the boy's shoulder. "She's not for sale at any price." The smile finally faded from Victor's face. "Look, I understand you think you're doing something noble here, but this horse is damaged goods. You know her history. You know what she's capable of. Eventually she's going to hurt someone, probably you, and then what? Lawsuit? Criminal charges? I'm offering you an out before that happens. Tommy's hand found Emma's, his small fingers gripping tight. Midnight stood in her stall with her ears pinned back, tension radiating off her like heat. Emma looked at Victor Hastings and saw everything she had been running from for 3 years. The easy way out. The practical choice. The voice that said some things are too broken to fix, and the smart move is to let them go before they bring you down too. I appreciate you driving all the way out here, Emma said evenly. But my answer is no. It's going to stay no. So I'd ask you to leave now. Victor's jaw tightened. His hand went to his pocket and came out with a business card, which he set on the fence rail. When you change your mind and you will call that number, we can work out the details. He got back in his truck and drove away, leaving a plume of dust that hung in the evening air like a ghost refusing to disperse. Tommy looked up at Emma, his eyes asking a question he couldn't voice. Emma squeezed his hand and said, "She's staying. We're all staying." And for the first time since she had driven away from the auction with a traumatized mare in her truck, Emma realized she meant it. She wasn't sure what she had started, wasn't sure how it would end, but she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she needed to do, even if the whole valley thought she was crazy. Especially if they thought she was crazy. Because crazy was just another word for refusing to accept what everyone else said was inevitable. The September heat hadn't broken yet, but mornings carried a hint of what was coming. That first whisper of autumn that made the sagebrush smell sharper and turned the light a different shade of gold. Emma had been at the Bennett Ranch for 3 weeks now, and the magazine assignment sat unfinished on her laptop, a collection of half-written paragraphs and placeholder text that she opened every few days out of guilt before closing again. Her editor had sent 2 emails asking about her progress. Emma had responded to neither. The mare had become the center of everything. Not by Emma's design exactly, but by the simple mathematics of attention. Midnight required feeding twice daily, fresh water constantly, stall cleaning that turned Emma's hands rough and her shoulders sore. Beyond the physical maintenance, there was the other work, the invisible work of presence. Emma spent hours in the barn doing nothing that looked productive, just existing in the same space as the mare, letting Midnight's nervous system slowly accept that proximity to a human didn't automatically mean violence. Some days felt like progress. Midnight would take grain from the bucket while Emma stood 10 feet away instead of 20. She would lower her head when Emma spoke instead of throwing it high in alarm. Other days felt like starting over, the mare skittish and wild-eyed, as if overnight she had forgotten every small piece of trust they had built. Tommy came every day now, arriving after school with his camera and a quiet determination that reminded Emma of monks she had once photographed at a monastery in New Mexico. He would settle into his spot near the barn entrance and begin documenting, his shutter clicking in rhythms that seemed to match his breathing. He had started bringing a small notebook too, spiral-bound with a green cover, and Emma sometimes caught him writing in it, his hand moving across the page in careful, deliberate strokes. She never asked to see what he wrote. Privacy felt sacred here, as important as the work itself. Maria Garcia had started stopping by on her way home from the hospital where she worked as a nurse. She would lean against the corral fence still wearing her scrubs, watching her son photograph the mare, and something about her presence felt like approval granted in installments. One evening she brought tamales wrapped in foil, still warm, and handed them to Emma without ceremony. For letting him find his way back, she said simply, and Emma understood that Tommy's silence was lifting. Not in words yet, but in other languages, and that Maria was thanking her for being witness to it. Jack had taken to joining Emma for coffee in the mornings, the two of them sitting on the porch while the sun cleared the mountains and turned the valley floor from shadow to substance. He didn't talk much, which Emma appreciated. When he did speak, it was usually to point out something about the land, the way the wind patterns predicted weather, which fence lines needed attention, how to read the behavior of the hawks that hunted the fields. He never asked about her plans or how long she intended to stay. Emma suspected he understood that those were questions she couldn't answer yet, that she was living day by day the way addicts in recovery lived, and that looking too far ahead would make her bolt. On a Thursday morning when the light came through the barn slats like visible music, Emma was playing guitar when she noticed Midnight had moved closer than ever before. Not just 5 feet closer or 10, but close enough that if Emma extended her arm fully, she could touch the mare's shoulder. Her heart rate spiked immediately, that old fear response firing, but she kept playing, kept her breathing steady, kept her body language soft. Midnight's ears were forward, rotating slightly to track the music. Her eyes were half closed. She looked almost sleepy, if horses could look sleepy, and Emma realized with a start that the mare was relaxed. Actually relaxed. The constant tension that had defined her body for weeks had eased into something that resembled peace. Emma finished the song and set the guitar down slowly, every movement telegraphed and gentle. She stood up from her bucket and Midnight's head came up slightly, alert but not alarmed. Emma took one step forward, then another. Midnight held her ground. Emma extended her hand, palm down, fingers loose, and stopped with her arm hanging in the space between them. She didn't reach for the mare. She just offered, the same way she had been offering her presence every day for 3 weeks, and waited for Midnight to decide. The mare's nostrils flared, reading the scent. Her neck stretched slightly, head lowering, and then her muzzle touched Emma's palm. The contact lasted maybe 3 seconds, maybe 5, just breath and warmth and the velvet softness of horse lip against human skin. Then Midnight pulled back, not in fear but in completion, as if she had asked a question and received an answer that satisfied her. Emma stood perfectly still, hands still extended, tears running down her face without sound. Tommy's camera clicked from the doorway, capturing the moment, and Emma was grateful someone had documented it, because otherwise she might have believed she imagined the whole thing. That afternoon a truck pulled up that Emma didn't recognize. An old Ford with primer patches and a cab full of what looked like veterinary supplies. A woman got out, younger than Emma, maybe 25, with black hair cut short and practical, and an efficiency of movement that suggested someone who didn't waste time on unnecessary gestures. She wore jeans and a denim shirt with the sleeves rolled up, work boots that had actually seen work, and an expression that managed to be both friendly and evaluating at the same time. "I'm Dr. Sophie Kim," the woman said, extending a hand that Emma shook. "I run the mobile vet practice out of Carson City. Jack Bennett called me, said you might need someone to look at a horse." Emma glanced toward the house where Jack was visible through the window, and felt a rush of gratitude she didn't have words for. "The mare hasn't been checked by a vet since I got her. I'm not sure how she'll react." Sophie nodded, already moving toward the barn with the purposeful stride of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "Let's start with observation. I won't touch her today unless she invites it. I just want to see what we're working with." They entered the barn together and Midnight immediately tensed, head high, eyes wide. Sophie stopped well back from the stall, giving the mare space, and just watched. Her eyes moved over Midnight's body with professional assessment, taking in coat condition, muscle tone, stance, the way she held her weight. After several minutes she pulled a small notebook from her pocket and started writing, her handwriting quick and decisive. "She's underweight but not dangerously so," Sophie said without looking up from her notes. "Probably lost condition from stress. Hooves need trimming. I can see that from here. Coat's dull, which suggests either parasites or poor nutrition. Likely both. But the bigger issue is psychological. She's carrying trauma in her body. You can see it in how she holds her neck, the tension through her back. She's been in fight or flight mode for so long her nervous system doesn't remember any other setting." "Can that be fixed?" Emma asked. Sophie looked at her directly, dark eyes serious. "Fixed implies returning to a previous state. That horse is never going to be what she was before Katie Vance died. But can she find a new equilibrium, a way of being in the world that doesn't require constant vigilance? Yes, maybe. With time and patience and someone who understands that healing isn't linear." She closed the notebook. "Jack said you're the one who bought her at auction for $100. "That's right. Why?" Emma thought about all the ways she could answer that question. "Because I was there. Because no one else wanted her. Because I'm broken too, and recognize my own kind." Instead she said, "Because walking away felt like giving up on myself." Sophie's expression shifted, something like recognition passing across her face. "Okay," she said. "Here's what I can do. I'll come by once a week, check on her progress, handle any medical issues that come up. I work on a sliding scale, and for cases like this, cases where someone's actually trying to help an animal everyone else wrote off, I mostly work for free." She smiled slightly. "Call it professional satisfaction." "I can't ask you to do that," Emma said. "You didn't ask. I'm offering." Sophie walked back to her truck and returned with a container of vitamin supplements and a bag of dewormer. "Start with these. Mix the vitamins in her grain, and we'll do the dewormer in a few weeks once she's comfortable with you handling her. I'll show you some basic bodywork techniques, simple massage stuff that can help release the trauma she's holding in her muscles. But the main prescription is exactly what you're already doing. Time, presence, and respect for her process." Emma took the containers, feeling the weight of them in her hands like a promise she was making. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Sophie said. "The hard part hasn't started. Right now you two are in the honeymoon phase, building trust in a controlled environment. Eventually you're going to have to ask her to do things that scare her. That's when you'll find out if the foundation you're building is strong enough to hold." After Sophie left, Emma sat with that warning, turning it over in her mind. She knew the vet was right. At some point she would have to move beyond simply coexisting with Midnight. She would have to work with her, train her, prepare her for a life that included more than standing in a stall. But the thought of pushing the mare, of asking for more than she was ready to give, made Emma's chest tighten with anxiety. What if she pushed too hard and broke the fragile trust they had built? What if she triggered something in Midnight that sent them both spiraling backward? What if she was fooling herself into thinking she could help when really she was just delaying the inevitable? Tommy appeared beside her so quietly she startled. He held out his green notebook, open to a page covered in careful handwriting. Emma took it, squinting in the dimming light to read. The words were simple, a child's vocabulary, but the meaning cut through like a blade. "You are scared to fail, but you are here. Being here is not failing." Emma read it 3 times, each time feeling the truth of it settle deeper. She looked at Tommy, at this boy who hadn't spoken in 2 years, but who could somehow articulate what she needed to hear, and nodded. "You're right. Being here is enough. For now, being here is enough." Tommy took the notebook back and wrote something else, then showed her. "Midnight is scared too. You are the same. That is why you can help." The next morning Emma started leaving the stall door open. Not wide open, just cracked enough that Midnight could push it if she chose. For 3 days nothing happened. The mare stayed in her stall, eating her grain, drinking her water, watching Emma through the gap with cautious eyes. On the 4th day, Emma was playing guitar in her usual spot when she heard the creak of the stall door swinging wider. Midnight stepped out into the main barn area, head high, ready to bolt back to safety, but curious enough to explore. Emma kept playing, didn't look directly at the mare, gave her room to investigate on her own terms. Midnight walked the perimeter of the barn, sniffing at the workbench, the ladder to the loft, the empty stalls. She found a patch of sunlight coming through the open barn door and stood in it, letting the warmth soak into her coat. Emma watched from the corner of her vision, afraid to breathe too hard, afraid to break whatever spell was allowing this moment of freedom. After 20 minutes Midnight walked back into her stall, and Emma closed the door behind her, but something had shifted. The mare had chosen to return, had tested her boundaries and found them flexible, found that she had agency within them, and that was a kind of trust too. That afternoon Emma drove into town for supplies, her first trip to Main Street since the auction. She parked outside Valley Feed and Tack, a sprawling building that smelled like molasses and leather and had been there longer than anyone could remember. Inside, she grabbed a cart and started loading it with grain, supplements, hoof picks, brushes, things she hadn't owned since she stopped riding 3 years ago. The weight of the cart felt significant, each item a commitment to seeing this through. At the register, the clerk was a man in his 60s with a beard like steel wool and eyes that had seen every kind of person try and fail at ranching. He rang up her items without comment until he got to the supplements. "This for that mare you bought at auction?" he asked. "Yes, sir." He grunted, something that could have been approval or judgment. Heard about that. Whole town's talking. Most people think you're crazy. What do you think? Emma asked. The man bagged her items slowly, considering. I think crazy and brave look a lot alike from a distance. I also think this town could use more people willing to look crazy. He handed her the receipt. You need anything else, you come see me. Name's Pete. We take care of our own around here, even when our own are newcomers doing foolish things. Emma loaded her truck and sat in the cab for a moment, watching people move along Main Street. She recognized a few faces from the auction, people who had laughed when she made her bid. Some of them looked away when they saw her. Others nodded, small acknowledgments that might have been respect or might have been simple recognition of her continued existence. She started the engine and drove back to the ranch, and the whole way she thought about Pete's words, about crazy and brave, about how sometimes the only difference was whether you succeeded or failed. Jack was waiting on the porch when she got back, and his expression was serious in a way that made Emma's stomach drop. We got a visitor while you were gone, he said. County Animal Control. Someone filed a complaint, said you got a dangerous animal on the property without proper permits or insurance. The officer said they'll be back next week to inspect, and if everything's not in order, they can seize the horse. Emma felt the ground tilt beneath her. Who filed the complaint? Jack handed her a business card. Same one that was left on your fence rail. Victor Hastings. Emma stared at the card, at the embossed lettering that probably cost more than her monthly budget. He's trying to force me to sell. That'd be my guess. Jack spit tobacco juice into a cup, his face hard. Man's used to getting what he wants. Doesn't sit well with him when someone says no. Problem is, he's got connections at the county office. His brother-in-law's on the board of supervisors. So when he makes a complaint, people listen. What do I need to do to pass the inspection? Jack pulled out a folded piece of paper, a printout of county regulations. Proof of liability insurance, which is expensive. Proper fencing that meets code specifications, which means replacing most of what I got. Veterinary health certificate. Proof the horse has been evaluated by a qualified trainer and deemed not dangerous. That last one's the kicker, because who's going to certify a horse with Midnight's reputation as not dangerous? Emma read through the list, calculating costs she couldn't afford, requirements she couldn't meet, and felt the old panic rising. This was it. The inevitable ending. She had been foolish to think she could make this work, foolish to believe that wanting something badly enough made it possible. Victor Hastings was going to win because men like Victor Hastings always won. They had money and connections and the patience to outlast anyone who tried to stand against them. Tommy appeared from the barn, his camera around his neck, and walked straight to Emma. He pulled out his green notebook and wrote furiously, then held it up. Do not give up. We will find a way. Emma wanted to believe him. She wanted to have his faith, his certainty that good intentions and hard work could overcome systems designed to protect power and property. But she was tired, so tired, and the weight of fighting felt heavier than the weight of surrender. She took the notebook from Tommy and wrote beneath his words. What if there is no way? What if some things can't be fixed? Tommy took the notebook back and wrote one more sentence, underlining it twice. You fixed me. I was broken and you fixed me. Now I help you. Maria Garcia's van pulled into the drive, and she got out looking concerned. Tommy showed her the notebook, the conversation written there, and Maria's face hardened with a determination Emma recognized from her own mother's face years ago, that particular fierceness of women who have survived things that should have destroyed them. She walked to Emma and said, My son has not written anything in 2 years, not a word, but you got him writing. You got him taking pictures again. You got him hoping again. So now we fight. We find a way because giving up is not an option. Not for you, not for that horse, not for my boy who finally found something worth believing in. That night Emma sat in the bunkhouse with her laptop open, searching for solutions. She found insurance companies that wouldn't cover horses with dangerous histories. She found fence contractors whose quotes made her bank account look like a joke. She found trainer certifications that required weeks of expensive courses. Every path forward seemed blocked by requirements designed to keep people like her people without money or connections or institutional support, from doing anything that challenged the established order. She was about to close the laptop in defeat when an email notification popped up. The sender was Sophie Kim. The subject line said potential solution, and Emma opened it with the desperate hope of someone drowning grabbing at anything that floated. Sophie had written a detailed message outlining an alternative approach. She knew a livestock insurance agent who worked with rescue operations and might be willing to take on Midnight's case. She had connections to a fencing company that did pro bono work for animal sanctuaries. And most importantly, she had her own trainer certification and was willing to evaluate Midnight and provide the necessary documentation, not as a favor but as a professional assessment based on her observations. The email ended with a single sentence. Victor Hastings has been trying to shut down operations like yours for years because they challenge his narrative that animals are property to be bought and sold and discarded when they don't perform. Don't let him win. Emma read the email 3 times, then walked out into the night. The stars were overwhelming, that particular density of light you only get far from cities, and she stood there letting the immensity of the sky remind her how small her problems were in the grand scheme of things, but also how important, because small problems were the ones that shaped individual lives, and individual lives were the only kind that actually existed. The grand scheme was just an abstraction. What mattered was this ranch, this horse, this boy who had started speaking again through photographs and careful handwriting. She walked to the barn and found Midnight standing at the stall door, as if she had been waiting. Emma approached slowly and extended her hand, and this time Midnight pressed her nose into Emma's palm and held it there, breathing out warm air that fogged in the cold night. Emma's other hand came up slowly, trembling, and touched the mare's neck. Midnight didn't pull away. Emma's fingers moved through the coarse hair, feeling the warmth of muscle and blood beneath, feeling the life force that everyone had tried to extinguish, but that kept burning despite everything. She thought about Katie Vance, about the moment when Midnight understood her rider was dying and stood guard over the body, traumatized and faithful. She thought about Tommy watching his father hurt his mother and then watching his father taken away, the silence that followed filling him up like water filling a drowning person's lungs. She thought about her brother Daniel and the seconds it took him to fall, the helplessness of watching, the guilt that came after and never left. We're all carrying dead people, Emma whispered to the mare. All of us, but maybe we don't have to carry them alone. Midnight's ears flicked forward, listening, and Emma stood there in the dark barn with her hand on a traumatized horse's neck and felt something break open inside her chest. Not break apart, break open, like a door that had been locked for years finally giving way to let light through. She cried then, really cried, the kind of crying that comes from a place deeper than sadness, and Midnight stood perfectly still, anchoring her to the present moment, proving that witness was its own kind of healing. When Emma finally walked back to the bunkhouse, dawn was starting to pale the eastern sky. She didn't sleep. She sat at her laptop and started writing emails. To the insurance agent Sophie had mentioned. To the fencing company. To her editor at the magazine explaining that the assignment had changed, that she was writing a different story now, one about what it meant to refuse to give up on something the world had already dismissed. She wrote until her fingers cramped and the sun was fully up and Jack was making coffee on the porch. Then she saved everything, closed the laptop, and went to feed the mare because that was the work, and the work was all that mattered. The work and the showing up and the stubborn insistence that broken things deserved better than abandonment. That broken things deserved witness. That broken things, given time and patience and someone willing to believe, might discover they were never broken at all. Just wounded. And wounds, unlike breaks, had the possibility of healing. The insurance agent's name was Robert Chun, and he drove out to the Bennett Ranch on a Tuesday morning when the air smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet. He was a compact man in his 50s who moved with the careful precision of someone who had spent decades assessing risk, and he walked around Midnight's stall making notes on a clipboard while the mare watched him with suspicious eyes. Emma stood back, letting him work, her stomach tight with anxiety. Everything depended on this evaluation. Without insurance, the county could seize Midnight regardless of anything else Emma did right. Robert spent 40 minutes observing before he spoke. He watched how Midnight responded to Emma's presence versus his own. He noted her body language, the way she held tension, where she directed her attention. Finally, he set down his clipboard and turned to Emma with an expression that gave nothing away. "This horse has been through hell," he said. "That's obvious. But she's not aggressive. Defensive, yes. Traumatized, absolutely. But there's a difference between an animal that will attack unprovoked and an animal that will defend itself when cornered. Every assessment I've done, and I've done hundreds, comes down to one question. Is this animal dangerous to humans who treat it with respect? And my answer here is no. She's dangerous to humans who try to dominate her, who use force, who ignore her communication. But that's not the same thing. So you'll insure her?" Emma asked, barely breathing. Robert picked up his clipboard and started writing. "I'll insure her under a specialized rescue policy with provisions. You need to complete a basic horsemanship safety course, which I can arrange. The horse needs to pass a veterinary behavioral assessment every 6 months, and you need to maintain detailed records of all training and handling. But yes, I'll write the policy." He looked at Emma directly. "Victor Hastings called my office 3 times trying to talk me out of coming here. Told me you were irresponsible, that the horse was a liability, that I'd be making a mistake. That alone made me want to take this case. I don't like people who use their influence to bully others out of doing the right thing." Emma felt tears threatening and pushed them back. "Thank you doesn't seem like enough. Then don't thank me. Just prove me right." Robert handed her a business card with his direct number. "The policy will be active within 48 hours. When animal control comes back, you show them the certificate and they'll have to back off. At least on the insurance issue." The fencing came next. A crew of 3 showed up on Thursday in a truck loaded with cedar posts and rolls of wire fencing that looked military grade. The crew chief was a woman named Andrea whose arms were mapped with tattoos of various animals and who explained that her company did periodic pro bono projects for rescue operations. "We believe in putting our skills towards something that matters," she said, already surveying the existing fence line with a critical eye. "This is going to take us 3 days, maybe 4. We'll work dawn to dusk. Get it done before your inspection." Emma tried to figure out how to express gratitude that felt adequate and came up empty. Andrea seemed to sense this and waved it off. "Just let us work," she said. "And maybe let that kid with the camera take some photos. My crew would get a kick out of being documented." Tommy did exactly that, following the crew around with his camera, capturing them digging post holes and stringing wire and building something that would last. He showed Andrea his growing collection of midnight photos, the visual story he had been constructing, and she studied them with real interest. "You've got an eye," she told him. "These aren't just snapshots. You're telling a story." Tommy's face went red with pleasure and he wrote in his notebook, showing it to Emma later. She said, "I am telling a story. I did not know I could tell stories." Sophie Kim returned on Friday to do the veterinary behavioral assessment required by the county. She brought equipment this time, a stethoscope and various instruments, and she moved around midnight with the calm authority of someone who understood that confidence was contagious. She examined the mare's teeth, her hooves, listened to her heart and lungs, checked her eyes and coat. Midnight tolerated it all with remarkable patience, only tensing when Sophie ran her hands down her legs, checking for old injuries. "There," Sophie said softly, finding a thickened area on Midnight's right foreleg. "Old strain, probably from compensating after the accident. It doesn't affect her movement now, but it tells me she was injured that day too. She wasn't just traumatized psychologically. She was hurt physically and had to work through pain while processing trauma. That takes incredible resilience." Emma thought about that, about the mare carrying physical pain on top of emotional devastation, about how no one had bothered to check if she was hurt because they were too busy labeling her dangerous. How many times did that happen with people too? How many humans got written off as difficult or broken when really they were just in pain and no one had asked? Sophie completed her forms with meticulous detail, documenting Midnight's current health status, her responsiveness to handling, her behavior patterns. For the behavioral section, she wrote a paragraph that Emma read over her shoulder. "This mare exhibits clear signs of complex trauma but demonstrates remarkable progress under consistent, respectful handling. She is capable of appropriate social behavior when given agency and space to process. With continued patient work, She has excellent potential for rehabilitation and partnership. I certify that she does not pose an inherent danger to humans who approach her with proper training and awareness. The danger lies not in the horse but in humans who refuse to learn her language. That paragraph is going to save her life, Emma said. Sophie looked at Midnight, at the mare who was now approaching Emma voluntarily for the scratches behind her ears that she had started to enjoy. That mare already saved her own life by surviving everything that's happened to her. We're just giving her the paperwork to prove it. The day before the county inspection, Jack found Emma in the barn and handed her an envelope. Inside was $500 in worn bills that looked like they had been saved over time. For whatever else you need, Jack said. Filing fees, permits, whatever bureaucratic nonsense they throw at you. Emma tried to refuse, but Jack cut her off. My wife would have liked you, would have liked what you're doing here. She always said the measure of a person isn't what they do when it's easy but what they do when it costs them something. You're passing that test. So take the money and use it. Maria Garcia showed up that evening with Tommy and a casserole dish covered in foil. She also brought a folder containing 3 letters. One was from herself, explaining how working with Emma and Midnight had helped her son begin recovering from his trauma. One was from Tommy's school counselor, documenting his improvement in behavior and engagement. The third was from Tommy himself, written in his careful handwriting, explaining what the mare meant to him, how photographing her had given him a way to communicate when words had failed, how watching Emma refuse to give up had taught him that some things were worth fighting for even when everyone said they were impossible. You give these to whoever comes, Maria said. You make them see that this is not just about one horse. This is about what happens when someone decides that broken things matter. That night Emma couldn't sleep. She lay in the bunkhouse listening to coyotes yip in the hills and thought about all the people who had gathered around this effort, strangers mostly, who had chosen to invest their time and resources and faith in something that made no practical sense. Robert Chun driving 3 hours to write a policy he could have easily refused. Andrea and her crew donating labor worth thousands of dollars. Sophie providing veterinary services at a fraction of her normal rate. Jack offering his land and his money and his quiet steadiness. Maria and Tommy offering their story, their vulnerability, their hope. None of them knew Emma well. None of them owed her anything. But they had seen something worth protecting and they had shown up, and that felt like a kind of miracle. The county inspector arrived at 9 in the morning in a white truck with official logos on the doors. His name was Dale Morrison and he carried a tablet and a clipboard and an expression that suggested he had seen every kind of operation and wasn't easily impressed. Victor Hastings pulled up right behind him in his black Silverado, and Emma understood immediately that this was coordinated, that Victor was here to make sure the inspection went exactly as he wanted it to. Dale walked the property methodically, checking fence lines against specifications, examining the barn structure, reviewing Emma's documentation. Victor followed like a shadow, occasionally pointing things out, making comments that sounded helpful but were clearly intended to raise red flags. That fence post looks unstable. Is there proper drainage in that stall? I'm not sure that water source meets code requirements. Dale ignored most of it, his face neutral, but Emma could see him making notes and her anxiety climbed with each notation. After an hour of exterior inspection, Dale asked to see the horse. Emma led him to the barn where Midnight stood in her stall, ears forward, watching the strangers with alert interest. Dale stood well back and observed, checking his tablet occasionally. Victor moved closer, and Midnight's ears pinned back, her body tensing. See, Victor said, loud enough for Dale to hear. She's aggressive, dangerous, exactly what I reported. Step back, please, Dale said to Victor, his voice carrying authority. You're in her space and she's responding defensively. That's not aggression, that's appropriate boundary setting. Victor retreated, jaw tight with frustration, and Dale continued his observation. Emma waited, her heart hammering, while Dale made notes that she couldn't read from where she stood. Finally, Dale set down his clipboard. I need to see your documentation. Insurance, veterinary assessment, training records, all of it. Emma handed him the folder she had prepared, every document Sophie and Robert had provided, the letters from Maria and Tommy's counselor, the photographs Tommy had taken showing Midnight's progression from terrified to calm. Dale sat on a hay bale and read through everything methodically, taking his time, while Victor paced and Emma tried to keep breathing steadily. When Dale finished reading, he looked at Emma with an expression she couldn't interpret. "This is the most thorough documentation I've seen for a private rescue operation. Your insurance is valid and appropriate. Your veterinary assessment is detailed and professional. Your fencing exceeds code requirements." He glanced at Victor. "And these letters make a compelling case that this animal is providing therapeutic value to the community, specifically to a child recovering from trauma." Victor stepped forward. "But the horse's history, her reputation, what happened to Katie Vance, all of that proves she's dangerous. You can't ignore facts." "I'm not ignoring facts. I'm distinguishing facts from narrative. The fact is Katie Vance died in an accident. The narrative is that this horse caused it, but there's no evidence of that. The fact is this horse has injured people who tried to force train her using dominance methods. The narrative is that she's inherently vicious, but defensive behavior under duress doesn't equal inherent danger." Dale stood up, brushing hay from his pants. "Based on my inspection and the documentation provided, I'm certifying this operation as compliant with county regulations." He signed a form on his clipboard and handed Emma a copy. "You're good for 1 year. After that, you'll need to renew with updated assessments." Emma took the paper with shaking hands, barely believing what she was hearing. Victor's face had gone red, veins standing out on his neck. "This is a mistake," he said, his voice rising. "When someone gets hurt, when this horse attacks someone, the liability is going to fall on the county for approving this. You're opening yourself up to lawsuits, to career damage, all because you're letting emotion override common sense." Dale turned to Victor with an expression that had lost all neutrality. "Mr. Hastings, I've been doing this job for 22 years. I've seen actual dangerous animals, the ones that need to be removed for public safety. This isn't one of them. What this is a traumatized horse receiving appropriate care from someone who's following all regulations and then some. Your repeated attempts to interfere with this operation, including your phone calls to my office and to the insurance company, are noted in my report. If you continue this harassment, Ms. Torres has grounds for a restraining order. Now I suggest you leave this property." Victor stood there for a moment, fury radiating off him like heat, then turned and walked to his truck. He paused before getting in and called across the yard to Emma. "This isn't over. You'll slip up eventually. Everyone does. And when you do, I'll be there." He drove away, spraying gravel, and Dale shook his head. "Some people can't stand watching others succeed at something they think is impossible. Says more about them than it does about you." He packed up his equipment and handed Emma his card. "If you have any problems, if he escalates his harassment, you call me directly. And congratulations. You did something most people don't. Have the courage to attempt." After Dale left, Emma walked into the barn and sank down onto her usual bucket, her whole body trembling with relief and residual fear. Midnight came to the stall door and lowered her head over the barrier, close enough that Emma could feel her breath. Tommy appeared with his camera and took a photo of that moment, Emma sitting in a shaft of light with the mare reaching toward her. And later, when Emma saw that photo, she would realize it captured something essential about what they had built here. Not triumph exactly. Something quieter. Just survival, the stubborn insistence on continuing to exist despite everything designed to prevent it. The story began to spread through Carson Valley in the way stories spread through small communities, changing slightly with each telling but keeping its essential shape. The girl who bought the killer horse for $100. The mare that was supposed to be destroyed but wasn't. The showdown with Victor Hastings and the county inspector. Some versions made Emma sound like a saint. Others made her sound foolish. But what mattered was that people were talking, and some of those people started showing up. An elderly woman arrived on a Saturday morning leading a skinny gelding with overgrown hooves and ribs showing through his dull coat. She was apologetic, explaining that her husband had died, and she couldn't afford to keep the horse but couldn't bear to send him to auction. Could Emma take him? Emma looked at Jack, who nodded slowly. "We got the space," he said. "Might as well use it." The woman cried when she handed over the lead rope, and Emma promised to send updates, to let her know how he was doing. 2 weeks later, a truck pulled up with a mare that had foundered. her hooves deformed from untreated laminitis, her owner unable to afford the specialized care she needed. Then came a pony that had been kept in a backyard with no shelter, seized by animal control and needing placement. Each arrival stretched Emma's resources thinner, but each one also reinforced the purpose of what was happening here. This wasn't about one horse anymore. It was about building something that could hold all the unwanted and discarded, that could say you matter even when the world said otherwise. Sophie recruited 2 vet tech students to help with the increased workload, teaching them about trauma-informed animal care while they treated abscesses and parasites and malnutrition. Andrea's fencing crew came back to build additional corrals. Maria started bringing other mothers from her church group, women who had survived their own traumas and recognized healing work when they saw it. They brought food, supplies, labor, and their own stories, and slowly the ranch transformed from a place where one girl was trying to save one horse into something larger, something communal. Tommy's photographs documented all of it. He had hundreds now, organized into folders on Emma's laptop, a visual archive of transformation. His favorite subject remained Midnight, but he also photographed the other horses, the volunteers, the way light moved through the barn at different times of day. His mother showed the photos to a teacher at his school, who showed them to a local gallery owner, who contacted Emma about doing an exhibition. Youth photographer documents animal rescue. The theme could be rehabilitation and hope. Emma asked Tommy if he wanted to do it. He wrote in his notebook, holding it up with shaking hands. "I want people to see what I see. That broken things can heal." The exhibition opened in October at a small gallery on Main Street, and half the town showed up. Tommy's photographs lined the walls in careful sequence, telling the story of the ranch's evolution from abandoned property to sanctuary. The centerpiece was a series of images showing Midnight's transformation, from the wild-eyed, terrified mare at the auction to the calm animal, who now pressed her nose into Emma's hand. Viewers moved through the gallery in hushed tones, and Emma watched their faces change as they absorbed what the images were saying. Victor Hastings came to the exhibition. Emma saw him enter, saw him walk slowly along the walls, studying each photograph with an expression she couldn't read. He stopped in front of the final image in the Midnight series, the one showing Emma and the mare standing together in the pasture at sunset, the mare's head lowered to rest on Emma's shoulder. Victor stood there for a long time before he finally turned and left without speaking to anyone. Emma would never know what he thought in that moment, whether he felt anything like remorse or simply confirmed his belief that sentiment was weakness. But he didn't bother them again after that night. His harassment stopped as suddenly as it had started, and Emma chose to interpret that as its own kind of surrender. Tommy spoke for the first time at the exhibition's closing reception. Emma was talking to a reporter from the local paper when she heard Maria gasp, and she turned to see Tommy standing in front of a group of people, his mouth moving, words actually coming out. His voice was rusty from disuse, halting and quiet, but it was there. He was explaining one of his photographs, describing how he had waited for an hour to catch the exact moment when Midnight yawned, how he wanted to capture the vulnerability of that gesture. People gathered around him, drawn by the small miracle of a silent child finding his voice, and Emma had to walk outside because the emotion was too big to contain in a public space. Maria found her in the alley behind the gallery, crying against the brick wall. Maria didn't say anything at first, just stood there providing presence. And when Emma finally caught her breath, Maria pulled her into a fierce hug. "You gave me my son back," she whispered. "However long you're in this valley, you'll be family to us. You understand that? Family." Winter arrived early that year, snow falling in November and staying, transforming the ranch into something from a postcard. Emma had to learn cold weather horse care, breaking ice in water troughs, adding extra hay for warmth, blanketing the older horses. Jack taught her how to watch for signs of colic, how to treat thrush, how to recognize when a horse was compensating for pain. The work was constant and exhausting, and Emma had never felt more purposeful in her life. On a morning when the temperature was below freezing and her breath hung in the air like something solid, Emma walked to Midnight's pasture and found the mare waiting at the gate. Over the months, their relationship had deepened in ways that felt almost telepathic. Emma could read Midnight's moods from the position of her ears, the tension in her muscles, the way she held her tail. Midnight had learned Emma's rhythms too, knew when she was sad or anxious or simply tired, and adjusted her own energy accordingly. Emma opened the gate and Midnight walked out, following without a lead rope as they crossed the snowy field toward the open pasture beyond. This had become their morning routine, these walks where Emma didn't ride or train or ask for anything except companionship. They walked until they reached a high point where you could see the entire valley spread below, the town small and distant, smoke rising from chimneys, the world getting on with its business. Emma sat on a fallen log and Midnight stood beside her, close enough that Emma could lean against her shoulder, and they watched the sun clear the mountains together. "I don't know if I saved you," Emma said quietly, "or if you saved me. Probably both. Probably that's how it works. We save each other and call it different things depending on who's telling the story." Midnight lowered her head and sighed, that deep exhale that horses do when they're completely relaxed, and Emma closed her eyes and let herself feel the peace of this moment. Her brother was still dead. The grief hadn't gone away, but it had transformed into something she could carry without it destroying her. Something that reminded her Daniel had existed and mattered, and would always be part of her story. The guilt had eased too, replaced by understanding that accidents were called accidents because no one chose them, and that forgiving herself wasn't betraying him but honoring what he would have wanted for her. The magazine assignment had been abandoned months ago, but Emma was writing something else now, a book about the ranch, about trauma and healing, about what happens when you refuse to accept that some things are beyond repair. A publisher in New York had expressed interest after seeing Tommy's exhibition photos paired with Emma's writing samples. It felt surreal, the idea that this experience might become something other people could learn from, but also right, as if bearing witness was its own form of healing. Tommy appeared through the snow, trudging up the hill with his camera, and Emma waved him over. He sat on the other side of Midnight, the three of them in a row, and they stayed there until their feet went numb and the sun was high enough to burn off the frost. Before they headed back, Tommy pulled out his notebook and wrote something, showing it to Emma. "This is what happy feels like. I forgot, but now I remember." Emma read it twice and nodded. "Yeah," she said. "Yeah, this is exactly what it feels like." They walked back to the barn together, girl and boy and horse, leaving tracks in the snow that would be covered by the next storm but that existed perfectly right now. Proof of presence, proof of survival, proof that the most radical thing you could do in a world that profited from despair was to insist, quietly and stubbornly, that hope was not naive but necessary, that broken things deserved care, that the unwanted deserved witness, that love, even difficult love, even love that required patience and faith and showing up every single day with no guarantee of return, was always worth it. Always. The December cold settled deep into the valley, the kind of cold that made metal burn skin and turned breath to ice crystals before it could dissipate. Emma woke in the bunkhouse to find frost patterns on the inside of the windows, delicate ferns of ice that melted under her fingertips. She dressed in layers, pulling on the insulated coveralls Jack had given her from his own closet, wool socks thick enough to make her boots tight, gloves that smelled like leather and decades of use. Outside, the world was blue with pre-dawn light, the snow reflecting what little illumination came from the stars still visible overhead. The horses were already moving in their shelters, restless with hunger and the instinct to generate warmth through motion. Emma made her rounds with hay, breaking flakes apart and distributing them across the various paddocks and stalls. Midnight met her at the gate as always, huffing warm breath that created clouds in the freezing air. Emma pressed her forehead against the mare's face for a moment, stealing warmth, sharing presence, before moving on to the others. The skinny gelding from the widow had filled out nicely, his coat glossy now, his eyes bright with the confidence of an animal who knew food would come reliably. The foundered mare still moved carefully, her specialized shoes helping her navigate, but she nickered when Emma approached, a sound of greeting that still made Emma's chest tight with gratitude. Jack emerged from the main house carrying 2 thermoses, steam escaping from the lids when he twisted them open to pour. Coffee for Emma, something that smelled like whiskey and honey for himself. They stood on the porch and watched the sun begin its slow work of turning the sky from blue to pink to gold, neither speaking because the morning felt too fragile for words. A hawk launched from a fence post, wings spreading wide to catch thermals that didn't exist yet in the frozen air. and it struggled for altitude before finding a current that lifted it toward the mountains. "Business is coming in," Jack said eventually, his voice rough from the cold. "Woman called yesterday from Elko. Got a Mustang her husband brought home from a BLM auction thinking he could gentle it. Didn't work out. She's asking if we got room." Emma sipped her coffee, calculating space and resources and the expanding scope of what they were building. "We can make room," she said. "We always make room." Jack nodded, unsurprised. "Gonna need to think about making this official. Nonprofit status, board of directors, all that legal nonsense. Can't keep running on goodwill and my social security check forever." He glanced at her sideways. "You thought about staying permanent? Making this your life instead of just a detour?" Emma had been thinking about exactly that for weeks, turning the question over in her mind during the long hours of barn work, during the quiet evenings when she sat with her laptop trying to write about things she didn't fully understand yet. Staying meant commitment, meant putting down roots in a place that had started as temporary, meant accepting that her life had changed in ways she couldn't have predicted 6 months ago. Leaving meant returning to the rootless existence she had been living, the motel rooms and magazine assignments and the carefully maintained distance from anything that might require her to stay. "I think I already have stayed," she said. "I just didn't realize it until now." Jack allowed himself a small smile. "Good," he said, "because I already talked to a lawyer about transferring the ranch into a trust with you as the primary operator. After I'm gone, this place becomes yours to do with what you're already doing with it. Figured you earned it." Emma turned to stare at him, coffee forgotten in her hand. "Jack, I can't accept that. This is your family's land, your history. I'm just someone who showed up and imposed on your generosity. Family's whoever decides to show up and do the work," Jack said flatly. "Blood doesn't mean much when the blood relatives are in Sacramento pretending you don't exist. You're here. You're doing something that matters, that makes you more family than my own son has been in a decade." He drained his thermos and headed back inside, conversation over, leaving Emma standing on the porch trying to process the weight of what he had just offered. Sophie arrived mid-morning with her 2 vet tech students, a young woman named Priya and a man named Marcus who were both in their final year of training. They had been coming weekly since November, learning hands-on skills that no classroom could teach. Today they were doing a full health assessment of all the horses, updating records for the nonprofit application Emma was preparing. Sophie supervised while Priya and Marcus moved from animal to animal, checking vitals, examining teeth and hooves, documenting scars and old injuries that told stories the horses couldn't speak. Midnight tolerated the examination with remarkable patience, standing still while Marcus listened to her heart and Priya ran practiced hands down her legs. "She's come so far," Priya said, awe in her voice. "When we first started coming here, she wouldn't let anyone but you within 10 feet. Now she's acting like a normal horse." "She's not normal," Sophie corrected gently. "She's traumatized but healing. There's a difference. Normal implies she should forget what happened to her. Healing means she's learning to live with it, to integrate her past into her present without letting it control her future. That's what all of us should be doing, human and animal alike." Marcus finished his notes and looked at Emma. "How do you know when she's ready for more? Ready to be ridden? I mean, that's got to be the end goal, right? Getting her to the point where she can have a purpose again." Emma had been wrestling with that question herself. She had sat on Midnight exactly twice, both times bareback in the pasture with no bridle or bit, just sitting there while the mare grazed, getting her used to weight on her back without pressure. But actually riding her, asking her to move with a rider, to respond to cues, to perform in any way, still felt like a bridge too far. "What if she's not meant to be ridden?" Emma asked. "What if her purpose is just to be here, to be herself, to teach people like Tommy that survival is enough?" Sophie considered this while she packed her equipment. "There's no rule that says every horse has to serve humans. She's already serving by being a teacher, by showing people what resilience looks like. If you never ride her again, that's a complete life. But if someday you feel called to try, trust yourself to know when. You've been listening to her this whole time. Don't stop now." After they left, Emma sat with Midnight in the barn, brushing the mare's coat in long rhythmic strokes that they both found meditative. She thought about purpose, about how humans were obsessed with defining it, with making everything serve some useful function. But maybe purpose was simpler than that. Maybe it was just showing up, day after day, and letting your presence matter to someone else. The mare leaned into the brush, eyes half closed, and Emma felt the truth of connection settle in her bones. This was enough. This moment, this breath, this shared space where neither of them had to be anything other than exactly what they were. Tommy came by after school with news that made him practically vibrate with excitement. He had been selected to show his photography in a regional youth art competition in Reno, a juried exhibition that could lead to scholarship opportunities. His mother had already agreed to take him, and he wanted Emma to come too, to see his work displayed in a real gallery alongside other young artists from across Nevada. Emma agreed immediately, proud of how far he had come from the silent boy who first appeared in her barn doorway. The exhibition was scheduled for mid-January, which gave Emma time to finish the nonprofit paperwork and submit it to the state. She worked late into the nights, filling out forms that asked for mission statements and budget projections and organizational structures. She listed Jack as board president, Sophie as vice president, Maria as secretary. For treasurer, she reached out to Pete from the feed store, who surprised her by accepting enthusiastically. Always wanted to be part of something that mattered, he said. Selling grain is fine work, but it ain't exactly changing the world. The name had taken weeks to settle on. Emma had cycled through dozens of options before landing on one that felt right. Sanctuary Ridge, named for the high point where she and Midnight took their morning walks, where the view stretched far enough to make problems feel smaller and possibilities feel larger. The mission statement took even longer, but when she finally wrote it, the words came easily. Sanctuary Ridge provides refuge and rehabilitation for horses who have been failed by the systems meant to protect them, while creating space for humans to heal alongside the animals who teach us that survival is never simple but always worth fighting for. Christmas arrived quietly. Emma hadn't celebrated the holiday in years. Not since Daniel died, and the rituals of family gathering felt like elaborate pretending. But Maria insisted on hosting dinner at her house, and Emma found herself sitting at a table crowded with people who had become her chosen family. Tommy and his younger sister, Maria's mother who spoke only Spanish but whose smile needed no translation, Jack looking uncomfortable in a button-down shirt, Sophie and her partner who brought wine and stories about their own rescue dogs. They ate tamales and ham and sweet potato pie, and when Maria raised her glass to toast, she looked directly at Emma. To the stubborn ones, Maria said, to the people who see something worth saving and refuse to let the world tell them it's impossible. To my son finding his voice. To wounded animals finding peace. To all of us finding each other. They drank to that, and Emma felt the loneliness that had defined her life for 3 years finally release its grip, replaced by something warmer and more durable. That night, walking back to the ranch under stars so bright they cast shadows, Emma stopped at Midnight's pasture. The mare was standing in the shelter Jack had built, visible as a dark shape against the snow. Emma climbed the fence and sat on the top rail, and Midnight walked over to stand beneath her, close enough that Emma could rest her hand on the mare's neck. She thought about the day at the auction, the laughter of the crowd, the certainty that she was making a mistake. She thought about Victor Hastings and the county inspector and all the obstacles that had seemed insurmountable. She thought about her brother and the guilt she had carried and the slow, painful work of forgiving herself. You know what I learned? Emma said to the mare. That healing isn't about erasing what hurt you. It's about building something new around the wound, something strong enough that the wound becomes part of the foundation instead of the whole structure. You taught me that, just by surviving, just by deciding every single day to keep going even when it would have been easier to give up. Midnight lifted her head and pressed her nose against Emma's knee, and they stayed like that while the temperature dropped and the stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the distance coyotes sang their ancient songs about survival and territory and the hard, beautiful work of making a life in unforgiving country. Emma felt the cold seeping through her coveralls but didn't move, didn't want to break the spell of this moment. This perfect crystallization of everything she had learned about love and loss and the stubborn refusal to let pain have the final word. When she finally climbed down and walked to the bunkhouse, her hands were numb and her face ached from the cold, but inside her chest something burned warm and steady, Something that felt like purpose or peace, or maybe just the simple knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do, and that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.